Her name was Deborah Joel, but everyone called her Debbie. She was 19 years old, the only daughter and child of her father, Pastor Joel, a strict and devout man who led his congregation with an iron fist. Her mother, Mommy Debbie, was equally strict, obsessed with maintaining the family's spotless reputation. Every 3 months, they would drag Debbie to the hospital for a virginity test. She was a chorister in the church, always standing in front, leading songs of praise with a voice as sweet as honey. On the outside, Debbie was the perfect daughter, a model of purity and righteousness, holy as holiness, but there was another side of her that no one knew. Debbie was in her final year at university, and she was told that people have started coming to her father asking for her hand in marriage. Pastor Joel wanted her to marry a pastor, someone who would continue to lead her down the path of righteousness. But Debbie had different plans. At home, she acted like Sister Mary, modest and devout. But outside, she was someone else entirely. Debbie had 3 boyfriends, each serving a different purpose in her life. The first boyfriend was Alhaji Bola. Alhaji Bola was a wealthy businessman in his mid-40s. He was married with children, but that did not stop him from pursuing young women like Debbie. He was the one who funded her vacations to Canada, bought her expensive jewelry, and clothed her in the latest designer outfits, but despite all his money, Alhaji Bola could not satisfy Deborah. His manhood was too small, and though he showered her with gifts, she always left the encounters feeling unfulfilled, but she kept him around because he was her ticket to a luxurious lifestyle. The second boyfriend was Tommy. Tommy was the opposite of Alhaji. He was not rich, not even close. In fact, Tommy struggled to make ends meet, but he had one thing going for him. He was amazing in bed, as she found herself drawn to him whenever she needed to satisfy herself, her physical urges. He lived in a small cramped apartment, nothing like the opulence as she was used to with Alhaji Bola. But she did not care. Tommy gave her what Alhaji Bola could not, and for that, she kept him close. The third boyfriend was James. James was essential to lean on. He was a driver, and she used him whenever she needed to get around. In a hurry. After nights of clubbing, when she was too drunk to drive, she would call James at midnight to come pick her up. He would always come running, no matter the time, no matter how tired he was. James was deeply in love with Debbie, but she did not feel the same way. He was an errand boy, useful for emergencies and nothing more to her. Debbie was living a double life. By this, she was the perfect pastor's daughter. And by night she was a young woman exploring her desires, unafraid of the consequences. The money she made from Alhaji and the other men in her life was spent on fashion and curing of infections, as a result of sleeping with too many men. But those 3 men, Alhaji Shukdeya and Tommy, were always there for her, each serving their purpose. Alhaji's wife, Miss Fatima, was aware of the affairs. She had sourced out her number in her husband's phone, and had called her multiple times, begging her to leave her husband alone. Miss Fatima had just given birth to twins, and her husband no longer touched her or took care of her and the children like before. But Debbie would only laugh and tell her that Alhaji was not just for her alone. "Don't be stingy," Deborah would say. "Let me enjoy myself. Your husband does not love you." Deborah's friends, who knew about their affairs, encouraged her to keep going. They told her to go for the gold, to push Alhaji aside, and find another wealthy man if he no longer served her needs. After all, who would sponsor her luxurious lifestyle on social media if Alhaji was out of the picture? Debbie used to cuddle whenever she needed physical satisfaction. He was always available, never questioning her motives. After a long night of passion, she would leave his apartment without so much as a goodbye, heading back to her life as the pastor's daughter. Alhaji Bola knew his place, and as long as he got to be with her, he did not mind. James, on the other hand, was her lifeline in emergencies. James would arrive, eyes heavy with sleep, but he would smile at her and ask if she had a good time. She never answered, just climbed into the car and lay down to be drive home, he's hoping that one day she might see him as more than just a driver. One day, a Hajibola world came crashing down. A series of bad investments left him bankrupt. He had to sell off his properties, including the luxury cars and the mansion he had shown off to Debbie. Debbie found herself without her main source of income. Alhaji was no longer the wealthy man she had relied on to fund her lifestyle. Deborah needed to find a replacement fast as she could. There were many men in her life who wanted to be with her, but they were not wealthy enough to meet her standards. She began searching for a new benefactor, someone who could keep her in the life of luxury she had become accustomed to. After her first semester of her final year, Deborah went back home for a short break. The family was celebrating Thanksgiving at the church, and Deborah played her role as a dutiful daughter perfectly. She sang hymns with the choir, smiled at the congregation, and listened attentively to her father's sermon. No one suspected the double life she was living. That night, after the celebrations were over, Deborah had a terrible dream. In the dream, she was running, being chased by huge men, through a dark forest. She could barely see where she was going, her heart pounding in her chest. As she ran faster and faster, the men were getting closer to her, and just as they grabbed her, she saw a familiar face, someone she knew but could not remember. Suddenly, she was lying in a coffin. The lid was closed, and she could hear the sound of anything around her. Then the coffin was lifted, and she felt herself being carried away. She struggled to move, but she was trapped inside. The coffin was taken to a graveyard, and through a small crack in the lid, she could see a young man walking in front. He was leading the procession while 4 men carried the coffin behind him. The air was thick with smoke, making it hard for her to breathe. Deborah woke up screaming, but no one hears, her heart racing. It was just a dream, but it felt so real. She got out of the bed and went to the bathroom. As she looked in the mirror, she gasped. There was black blood oozing from her eyes and nose. She wiped it away frantically, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. Then she heard her phone ringing. Deborah checked her phone. She had 15 missed calls from her mother, who was at church urging her not to miss Bible studying. Her mother had also sent her 7 Bible scriptures to pray on. Deborah rolled her eyes and put the phone down. But then she noticed a message on Instagram. It was from a young man who had been texting her for a while, but she had never paid attention to him until now. "Hi, pretty." The message read. Debbie hesitated for a moment, but something about the dream still lingered in her mind. Before she could reply, another message came in, "Send me your account details for being pretty." Debbie could not believe it. She quickly sent her account number, and within minutes, she received an alert of 3 million naira. Her eyes widened in disbelief. It was the first time a guy she had never met was paying her something so huge. Excited, Deborah called her girls, and they went out shopping, buying new clothes and accessories. She even got a few things for herself. Soon, she and the Snapchat guy started dating. He seemed perfect, charming, generous, and mysterious, but there was one strange thing. He only wanted her to visit him during her menstrual flow. She found it odd, but the money was good, so she did not question it. Some weeks later she visited. He would take her used parts and preserve them. It creeped her out, but she never said anything. Her parents had no idea what she was up to. To them, she was still their innocent daughter, busy with school and church girl life. But luxury and deceit had just taken a dark and mysterious place in her heart. Will she continue on this path, or will she find a way to escape the consequences of her actions? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, please subscribe to my channel for more captivating tales like this. What do you think will happen to Deborah? Will she find redemption, or will her secret catch up with her? Share your thoughts under the video. Thank you for your support.